What's the most disturbing secret you've discovered about somebody close to you? This story is from Fuzzy_Central. The 24 hours before my dad died of stage 4 lung cancer, he was in the ER and then the ICU, and we were unable to be with him because of hospital COVID rules. My mother, my sister, and myself have been texting and calling him all day, but got no response. My mother even called the hospital and spoke with one of the ICU nurses, who said he was awake and communicating just fine. He passed away very quickly at 3:30 a.m. the next morning. We were allowed to be at his bedside, but by then he was no longer conscious, so we said our goodbyes and then he was gone. Later that morning, while my mom was asleep, I called the cremation service to schedule his body pickup at the hospital and was going through a bag of his belongings that the hospital would return to us. His phone was in there and I wanted to read all of our texts and take some comforts in my last words to him. I opened his phone and all of our texts had not been read, not mine or my mom and sister's. I thought this was so odd, but I figured he'd been suffering so much that he couldn't find the strength. I began scrolling through his apps, and I noticed a chat app that I had vaguely heard of. I can't recall the name, but it essentially works like WhatsApp or any other instant messaging app. I opened the app and I saw a single contact with a female name. I started reading and I realized that my dad had been chatting with this girl hourly for the last 24 hours, and as far back as I could scroll. He was calling her princess and telling her how much he loved her, and she was saying that she was scared for him and wanted to know what was going on and why was he at the ER and stuff like that. I scrolled back far enough to know that this was somebody he was having at the very least an emotional affair with. My grief was completely hijacked by hurt and anger, and a week later I tracked down the girl and spoke to her via DMs and found out she was 19 years old. She was 17 when they met. He was her high school bus driver and she told me they had been dating for almost 2 years. My dad was 66 years old when he died and dating somebody younger than his grandchildren. Somebody he chose to spend his last moments with and say his last goodbyes to. I hope it made him happy, but it sure is a secret to live with for the rest of my life. A secret that'll forever overshadow my entire relationship with my dad, and no chance to ever speak to him about it. It's the one secret I wish I never knew anything about. Wow, OP, that story was intense. I honestly don't blame you. I probably couldn't look at my dad the same either if he did something like that to me on his deathbed. I'm sorry your father put you through that, OP. That's something that a parent should never put a child through. This story is from disabled_robot. My grandma had 12 kids. My uncle was the second oldest, who was mentally challenged and lived with her whole life. When she passed away, 10 of us went over and renovated the house, and fixed our uncle up with a new bed, a new TV, new appliances, and demod a few walls and made the place up just for him. Shortly after, one of our aunts came to visit, slept in the bed and left him in a cot, took him to the bank and attached herself to his account, which he had the whole inheritance in. Then she started making purchases off of his account and then started moving all the things that had value out of the house. I lived the closest, about 40 minutes away. When I went to go visit the next month, it looked like the house had been looted and my aunt had moved back to her own house about 5 hours away. My uncle lived a few years on his own until he realized how people constantly try and take advantage of him, and then he moved into a facility, a mentally challenged 70-year-old in a suburb bungalow with just enough to suit the basic necessities. Some people are disgusting the way they can take advantage of people. Your aunt in this story is an absolute pile of garbage. I can relate to this story a lot, and it makes my blood boil to hear stuff like this. My uncle has Downs and autism, and my family helps him run a successful landscaping business. There are times when people try and take advantage of him, and my family's always there to protect him, and I couldn't imagine a scenario where somebody tries to take advantage of him like this and my family wasn't there. OP, I agree with you. It's disgusting that there's people out here who get away with stuff like this. This story is from Charlie24601. While my cousin was walking around with her son in the woods, she came across a hunting stand. She climbed it and found a pair of binoculars. Sitting straight up forward, lifted the binoculars to her eyes, and what she saw was her own bedroom window. Let's be logical here. If it was a legit hunting stand, it was facing and closer than 500 feet to a residence, which is illegal, which means it had to come down. When my brother and I visited not long after, she showed us where it was. We tore it down and literally wrapped it around a couple of trees. Bent that to complete uselessness. I got an angry call the next day. Did you tear down a hunting stand yesterday? Yeah, I did. That was your uncle's, her mother's brother. Turns out that my cousin reported the hunting blind to my family, but they still ignored the issue. When my uncle was asked, he said it was just an old treehouse out there. Even when he was exposed, they didn't really care. They were just more upset about the damage that we did. Suffice to say that I've written off most of that side of the family. This story is from local_pineapple 1930. I found out that the reason why one of my uncles didn't want to go back to Korea when he retired was the simple fact that he couldn't. He lived in fear of political repercussions if he tried to return to his country. Turns out his brother was a part of a group that assassinated the South Korean president back in 1979, and his own innocence was never proven, so he was in fear of getting arrested if he ever tried to go back. The rest of the Reddit post has a link to the assassination of Park Chung-hee. That's not something you just talk about over dinner casually, like, hey, would you pass the water? Also, I can't go back to Korea because, my brother's an assassin. This next story is from Lupo_Bywan_Kenobi. Just after my grandma took her last breath, she lay in her bedroom on her bed. The entire family was there with her, including my aunt. My grandmother was an amazing woman. It was a terribly sad event to lose her. My aunt began putting lotion on her hands. At the time, I don't think any of us thought much of it. I think I recall thinking, oh, that's sweet. It was a little strange, but I thought she was doing it because my grandma's hands may have looked a little dry, and it was maybe the last time she'd be able to do something like that for her. My sister yells that in a very aggressive tone, "You f***ing," and we all kind of step back like, whoa, what just happened? What's going on here? We're all puzzled, looking at my sister like, what was that about? And then she says, she just slipped one of the rings off her fingers. That was a bad day. My aunt then rushed the sale on the house, even though my mom didn't want to sell it at all. My family had been fractured ever since that day. This next story is from Jimmy P from the 5th Gala. My brother was stealing money from my father who had dementia. This went on for a year, and I only found out because the bank who had my father's mortgage called me wondering why it hadn't been paid in 6 months. My father's bank account went into the negative around this time too, and when I confronted my brother, he said, "Well, I gotta pay my bills too." I was about to take control of all the accounts and make sure my dad got back on track, but my father ended up in the hospital and died shortly after that. My brother also stole some of the inheritance too. In the end, he stole over $5,000 from his own dying father. This next story is from Recalcitrants. I have a brother who's actively stealing money from my parents. He's a do-nothing, a liar, and a stoner, and my parents are huge enablers because they don't want to be mean. So they let him steal even though they know about it. They confronted him once and he said, quote, "Calm down, it's not that big of a deal." Dementia runs through my family, and I'm honestly expecting to get zero money when my parents pass because my brother will have stolen it all and spent it on drugs, video games, and KFC. This next story is from Rimirilar. My grandfather once beat somebody to death. My dad was an only child, but my grandmother was once pregnant with my dad's younger brother. When she was 6 months pregnant, somebody in construction equipment ran over the car she was in while she was driving, and she lost the baby. While she was in the hospital, my grandfather found the guy and beat him to death. From what I understand, he was in jail for about a week before he was released. Apparently, he claimed temporary insanity due to the circumstances. I learned this all about 4 years ago when my brother was researching family history and asked my grandfather about it. I've always seen him as a nice little old man. Still seems like a little sweet old man to me. Just a sweet old man with a sense of justice.
This next story is by Starlined. So my grandmother, who's been estranged from my family for a long time now for a multitude of reasons, has this weird thing where she has to share food with people. Are you ordering a steak at a restaurant? Well, oh boy, she's got to order the same thing even if she doesn't like steak. Try her drink, it's really good. Take the first bite of chicken to let her know if it's any good. This always really annoyed me because I hate sharing food. One day I brought it up to my mom and she was like, "Oh yeah, Grandma's afraid of being poisoned, so she wants other people to try her food first. So let me get this straight. Grandma thinks someone is trying to poison her, so she has me try the food first?" And it makes so much sense looking back on it because she literally would not take a bite of anything she ordered until someone else had a bite of it first. Thanks, Grandma. This next story is by lillylenore. She was my best friend of 7 years. We had literally been through it all together. I moved out of the state with my now husband, but she convinced us both to move back to be closer with her after about a year. We had no real ties to the state that we had tried out, so we said screw it, let's go back. She's basically family. We were also happy to be reunited. She was over almost every night for dinner, and we all laughed and talked and had a blast. Best year of my life. Then, slowly, she started trying to turn my husband and I against each other. Anytime we had an argument, like any couple does, she would text both of us and tell us how right we were, trying to foster animosity between the two of us. With me, she started talking about how she had a plan B for us, and that if my husband and I couldn't make it work, I could move in with her and we'd live happy lives together. With my husband, she started talking about infertility issues and how she wanted to have a kid just like him. She just needed a sperm donor. This all happened around the same time, and my husband and I compared the text and figured it out. She wanted to take his sperm and have a baby with me. When confronted about it, she refused to admit anything and started lashing out at the both of us. It got to the point where she would show up unannounced, demanding a place in our home. It was so terrifying and panic-inducing, and we ended up having to move and change our phone numbers. I guess it's so disturbing because I had never had a friend like her, only to find out that she cared about me, but in such an unhealthy and scary way. But yeah, that's my story. Husband and I are great now, by the way. This next story is by Zoe Eliza 4. My coworker lets her dog hump her leg every morning until he, quote, releases while she has her coffee, which has stayed with me ever since I heard it. I can't think of anything else whenever I talk to her. This next story is by Doge-Poop-Bag. My great-grandmother was married to 3 different people at the same time. The men were from different branches of the military, and she was collecting all 3 of their paychecks at the same time. Your grandma sounds like a baller. This next story is by Webborn2622. He shot his friend in the foot on purpose. They were teens and they were playing with a gun while drunk. Stupid, I know. And he accidentally shot his friend in the foot. Except it wasn't an accident. He actually admitted to it being on purpose later. Edit, no, this isn't an event that happened in your small American town and we don't know each other. I'm not even an American and guns are like super illegal here. I have no idea how he acquired it. He could probably go to jail just on the merit of that alone. And from us Europeans, are you guys okay? This isn't a normal thing and you guys shouldn't relate to it at all. This next story is by the Dude Man 4311 that my mom cheated on my dad for 20 years and still hasn't told him to this day. I'm still trying to figure out what to do and how to go about the situation and exposing the truth about her to my dad, but I'm afraid that he would just die of a broken heart. The worst thing is, she cheated with my godfather who used to come to the house and drink coffee with my mom and dad every day. Down in the comments, UnicornBarf666 replies with this. As a kid who found out that one of their parents was cheating on the other, there is no good time to tell them. My brother and I both discovered that our dad was cheating on our mom separately and kept putting off telling her for over a year because it was Christmas, and then she had a business trip, and then it was her birthday, and then it was this, and then it was that. Then one day, I got in trouble with my dad, and he said, "You're a disgrace to this family," and out flew the words that he and my mom were not prepared for. I know it's hard. I know it will change everything if you tell your dad or confront your mom. Just wanted to give you some solidarity. This next story is by schmoobyboo. Finally, I can post the story in one of these. So me and my husband are teachers, and we taught for a couple of years in rural Alaska. It was pretty intense, but a great adventure. We learned a lot that we wanted, and a lot that we didn't. We befriended one of our colleagues, a single older man who seemed friendly enough. We would often go over for dinner, go hiking, go shoot his gun collection at a local rural beach using one of the school's Hondas. Rural life, no animals or local fauna were harmed. He took on the role of an uncle figure for us. We stayed at his Airbnb and spare bedroom at his house in the city on vacation once too. Now, our second year teaching there, he brings along this young woman at the start of the school year who he claims is his niece, and she never leaves his house. He claimed that she was having trouble living with his brother and she was taking online classes to graduate, and she confirmed this with myself and the other women in the village. Cut to spring. She leaves for home separately from this man and people ask why. He claims that she patched things up with his brother and her dad and went home. It turns out that this girl was basically an underage girl that he met online, and her father tracked her down after she contacted a local woman about her situation and sent a state trooper over to escort her home. She had been reported missing for 8 months prior. The messed up part was, on top of going to court for the situation starting the following summer, he tried to coax another underage girl offline to live with him the following school year, and it turns out that entire chat history was a sting by the FBI. He's in prison now until 2043. Oh my god, how can someone go under the radar for that long? I'm glad that creep is in prison now where he belongs. This next story is by L-saltshaker. My mom paid the guy who shot a bullet at my wife. She was my girlfriend at the time, when we were both 18. Quick edit. This is way too late for any of the people in the replies assuming I'm a man, but I'm not. OMG, any chance you could shed some context? Well, off the bat, it was a poorly executed hit, thank God, and she obviously recovered pretty well. Unfortunately, not the first time that there was a hit put out on her though. The same guy was paid to take out her mother while she was pregnant with her, but ended up killing her uncle instead, who had put himself in front of her mom. He even got away with it due to the severe negligence and the corruption that was rampant in the local police force at the time. And the one who hired the hitman was the then mayor's drug-addicted and alcoholic slob of a son who had some petty vendetta and bad history with my wife's mother. Said slob was also my mom's favorite lover, and after he died, of a severe OD mind you, she essentially had some sort of psychotic break or something. Mental health issues run in the family, and this kicked off some kind of domino effect of erratic behaviors on her part. Still to this day, we don't really know her true motivation, but we pretty much agreed that it probably had something to do with her losing her obsessive control over my life, which was primarily thanks to my wife. My mom's dead now, but we didn't know it was her for sure until she admitted it in her letter to me, so unfortunately, she basically got away with it. Sorry if this is a bit long-winded. Jesus Christ, OP, this sounds like something straight up out of a mob gangster movie. I can't believe your wife almost died twice. I'm glad that she and her mom both made it out alive, and that you don't have to deal with her anymore. This next story is by Dallas25. I discovered that my sister stole my father's $25K Rolex not even 24 hours after he died. I only discovered it when her and her husband made a frivolous purchase, and I wondered where they got the money since they're always broke and begging my parents for money. I got suspicious. It hit me that she might have stolen and sold the Rolex. I had the paperwork and I ran a track on the sales history and discovered it had been sold to a pawn shop down the street from where my sister lives. I went to the pawn shop and after a bit of persuasion, I got them to tell me who sold it to them, and it was my sister. Me and my mom quickly disowned her. This next story is by Angry Pirate 8. My great-grandmother came to America in 1918 and was held up in my family as someone who busted her to get to America to start a new life. When ancestry searches became a thing and other family members started digging into the past, we discovered she fled her home country because she stabbed and killed her husband. And yes, she was terrifying to me as a child.
That was Meme Reads. If you enjoyed this content, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Peace.